Sonic and Knuckles Mecha Madness. Let me guess, this is going to be another Super Sonic vs. Hyper Knuckles situation where practically the entire issue consists of Sonic and Knuckles fighting. Doesn't sound too interesting to me, just sounds like an entire story worth of filler. Although at least less so this time because Knuckles actually has a good reason to fight Sonic this time. And this is an interesting concept. But whatever, let's just get into it. I wouldn't have so much of a problem with this if Sonic wasn't in trouble with his friends during this whole thing. If his friends were all like, "Oh no, Sonic is in danger, we've got to get him back to normal," the whole time, then it would be acceptable, but instead they're just treating him like a traitor. So it starts out with Sally ordering everyone to carry out her drastic plan, despite Rotor not wanting her to. So what's that about democracy again? Now it's right back to, you're the princess, as it honestly should be. I feel like making all the freedom fighters part of a stupid bureaucratic council just slows down the action and impedes it or something. It's frustrating and out of place. It's faster to just have Sally tell everyone what to do, especially since she's smart, so she's a good leader. The freedom fighters are supposed to be a ragtag group of underdogs fighting a bigger threat, but being part of a political council detracts from that. It feels too official and stuck up, like they're official authority figures. She orders Nicole a full sweep of the village. How's she supposed to know what that order means? It sounds like pretty casual slang. I guess it means that she's checking to see if the entirety knothole has been evacuated yet. And it has. Sally had given the coded order of evacuation to Tails in the previous issue. I'm hoping they'll found another place to evacuate to, considering that Eggman found their place of evacuation last time with the Combots. So after Sally calls Sonic a traitor for having no free will again, and Antoine shows a sadistic glee in getting payback at Sonic for all the bullying he's put through, although he doesn't say that, which I would understand that, but I still hate him for this. Rotor gets out the roboticizer, saying it was the one that Bunny was in, and he had been repairing it on her order for this exact kind of situation. Unfortunately, he explains this in the most stilted dialogue ever, and you can tell because it's introduced by the infamous phrase, "as you know," which always makes no sense in universe, because if she knows, why would he even say this? Couldn't you have a text blurb at the bottom of the panel explain this without having stilted dialogue from characters do it? I like how Rotor asks in fear if they've all sunk in Eggman's level by trying to roboticize someone. It's good that he's worried about this and pointing out the potential hypocrisy, as well as showing his fear that he might become like Eggman just because he's a gadgeteer genius like him. But Sally's idea of a rebuttal is to say, "and you, Rotor?" and then say that they've got to fight fire with fire. The first line was completely nonsensical and pointless. It can even be interpreted as her insulting Rotor. So it's a good thing the second line actually bothers to try to explain herself. I don't get why she said that. Knuckles wakes up and attacks the nearest fat figure in a daze, Rotor, because apparently he's colorblind, I guess. But Sally snaps him out of it with a kick, and we once again get reminded of the garbage retcon nonsense that apparently Sally and Knuckles used to be bestest buddies ever, which makes no fucking sense. Why did Knuckles' father not force King Acorn off the floating island, king or not? They all hate intruders, don't they? Sally being old friends with Knuckles just reeks of creator's pet. But I've already talked about that. The point is, Knuckles immediately jumps at the opportunity to become a robot purely because he wants to get stronger. I love this character moment. It makes perfect sense of him. I wish Sally was allowed to actually explain the risks because I don't know what they are. Seems fine to me. And Bunny explains that having any metal parts will put a cramp on his social life. Okay, this interesting tidbit makes him more sympathetic, but it came out of complete nowhere, because she's always so out of focus that you never see her trying to have a social life outside the freedom fighters. So you never got to see, people being awkward and full of pity around her all the time. You never see her going to parties and stuff and people walking away from her because she's a cyborg. I hope that's all that happens, is not outright resentment and suspicion of her for being a cyborg, or jealousy. Because that would be pretty unsympathetic of the locals. It's not her fault. But yeah, this is interesting, but it definitely suffers from a case of show, don't tell. Not that it matters to Knuckles anyway, since, as she should know by now, Knuckles isn't the type to have a social life. so she has no reason to say this in universe, other than again, wanting an excuse to complain about her angst in a situation where it won't help any. And Antoine and Rotor get all panicky and teary fearing for the end, because I guess they're worried Knuckles won't survive or the Neural Overrider won't work, even though they're using an old roboticizer, which Eggman hasn't upgraded to move even more free will, so of course it's going to work. I don't see why they're so worried here. I kind of like how, while chasing Tails, Sonic hesitates at sending the coordinates and not hold Eggman. But considering Eggman said earlier that he upgraded his roboticizer to move even more free will, him being able to resist at all makes no sense. Good thing that it's explained later in the issue. Fortunately, the roboticized Knuckles comes in just in time to start a fight with him before he can give out the coordinates. Okay, so if he can get the coordinates of a place, that means GPS has to exist, so satellite imaging must exist. So while Nicole having a GPS makes sense then, not her being able to access it, why hasn't Eggman found Knothole from satellite imaging of the Earth already? But anyways, Sonic and Knuckles fight until Knuckles wins, and they can't have Knuckles always be a robot because he'd be less marketable and recognizable that way, even though logically he wants to always be like this because he just wants to be strong. Which is weird when you think of it, because didn't he express hatred of technology? And yet he's willing to become technology. I like how he has his priorities straight. He cares more about being a strong guardian than hating on technology. I also like how Knuckles severed Sonic's communications with Eggman, and that's the proper explanation for why he couldn't send the coordinates, rather than it being left as Sonic's too busy fighting to speak to Eggman, even though he could easily do both. Come on, you all know the outcome of the fight by now. But okay, I guess I have to explain the important part. Knuckles gets sent towards Robotropolis and activates a magnet to bring Sonic with him so that he'll get damaged too, which is what defeats them. It sure was convenient that Rotor put that magnetic field generator there to begin with. You'd think Rotor wouldn't see why he should, since it'll just bring Sonic close to him and thus make him easily capable of attacking him over and over again. I love that after the explosion makes them think that Sonic and Knuckles had died, Tails and Sally actually start crying from it, proving that yes, they do still care about them, even after they inexplicably turned on Sonic. But it's annoying that it's only them who are really sad. Robotropolis was heavily damaged in the nuclear explosion, but sadly Eggman survived because he saw Sonic and Knuckles coming and retreated to his nuclear shelter. Makes sense that he'd make this. Doesn't make sense that he could just come out of the nuclear shelter and won't be, like, hurt by the nuclear fallout that would still be existing after an explosion. And of course, Sonic and Knuckles are still alive, because they're built well enough to survive a nuclear explosion, apparently. And Knuckles attacks Eggman, bragging that Eggman doesn't build his robots like he used to, as Eggman had started using inferior foreign parts. How the hell would Knuckles, of all people, know that? And why would they be inferior just because they're foreign? And why would Eggman settle for less? Also, why did Knuckles know about Eggman's brain burnt through roboticizer to the point of even knowing its proper name? He's just knowing stuff because the writer wants him to. He brings the damaged, unconscious Sonic back to Knothole, and Antoine actually has the nerve to look annoyed and jealous when Sally reveals that yes, she still cares about him. Like I said, no sympathy. And they don't even bother to try to explain why he's being like this. We're just left to assume that it's because he's a commenter that he hates them. Sally says to set the roboticizer to de-robotization for both of them, so they have a cure. Just like that. Well, I guess it would be tedious trying to get every Robian into that thing, because the Robians would automatically try to hurt them whenever they see them. So they'd have to try to lure them to the de-roboticizer one by one. So it's like a zombie apocalypse. You can have a cure, but actually injecting a zombie with a needle without getting infected or killed yourself is another thing entirely. It kind of makes sense that Sonic would say that he doesn't deserve to live for betraying his friends. It's like he has morality sort of thing. But he had no free will. It's illogical of him to blame himself. How can he even do anything with Vision that bad? Why would Eggman give his robots Vision that bad? How did the tabloids even find out about stuff about Sally to begin with? What, do they find out from Antoine? Nicole explains that the 1 billionth ring of Sonic actually gave him an internal shield that absorbed and retained Sonic's life force. Or more accurately, his soul. She should have just said that. So it retained his consciousness, which Robotnik's brain burn-through device couldn't penetrate. It is a magical ring after all, so it does make sense. And it's the 1/1000th ring. So again, I don't see a problem here. It makes perfect sense. Sonic's personality still resided there, explaining why he could hesitate. So there's both a Chekhov's gun, and a Chekhov's gun that actually makes use of the 1/1000th ring in a story finally. So I like this. Rotor explains that his lab full of equipment to bring Sonic back was destroyed along with the rest of Knothole. So where are they going to go to sleep now? Then a Duke X Machina comes in, where Nicole says that she has the data apparently, and she can be plugged into Mecha Sonic because he has a hole to do that, and she'll try to instigate the retro procedure, which I assume is a convoluted way of saying de-roboticize him. So now even freaking Nicole is a de-roboticizer, as if she wasn't overpowered enough. Now I'm guessing the Freedom Fighters will forget about this and not try to plug her into any Robian that they'll see from now on. I think the explanation is she could only save Sonic because of his ring field inside of him. Now if the story arc ended here, I think I'd be able to handle this. After all, the Freedom Fighters have acknowledged over and over again that Sonic did not have free will, burn through technology and all, meaning that he wasn't responsible for any of the attacks against Knothole. But I guess they are still convinced that he got himself roboticized on purpose, and maybe they think that because of that brain burn through technology, that Sonic had a neural overrider and it just didn't work. After all, Knuckles clearly said the name of the technology, so if even he knows about it, everyone else should too. Which makes me wonder why they didn't warn Sonic about it and thus clear him of any suspicion before he could get captured. Why didn't they just say that when rejecting his plan? I'm rambling here. The point is, I can understand why they would blame him for getting himself roboticized. What I cannot understand is why they would turn against him and try to get him sent to prison for it. What a way to fucking repay him for everything he's done for them. He made an innocent mistake, or at least they think he did. A good friend would forgive him and realize, okay, you're not gonna do this again. You're not gonna disobey our orders after all this. We're just glad you're okay. But no! They all turn into backstabbing traitors and try to court-martial him after everything he's done for them. It should be blatantly obvious to them that they need Sonic the Hedgehog. Whenever they're without him, they get captured. Common sense would dictate that even if they put him in jail, they just end up captured and roboticized without him. Or with luck, they'd realize this before it's too late from failing a bunch of missions in a row and be forced to get him out of prison anyways. Bottom line here is, Sonic being treated like a traitor and arrested is absolute bullshit. Especially since, again, even pretending that he did get himself roboticized, it was in a plan that was trying to help them. It's not like he tried to inconvenience them on purpose. So this is an extremely steep, overreacting punishment for a failed attempt at helping them. If they did succeed at this bullshit, they'd all end up roboticized because they're nothing without him. And they practically deserve it for betraying him like this. You'd think after all the time they've known Sonic, they would know this. And Sally wiping away a tear doesn't help at all. If anything, it's just frustrating because she knows she's not doing the right thing, but she's gonna be a bitch and betray him anyways. And yes, it is betrayal. Friends don't send their friend to prison for trying to help them. That should really, really go without saying. I bet they don't even apologize afterwards. Once again, I can't believe this overly depressing story was written by Mike Gallagher. Oh yeah, and now there are backup stories again, and a special of all things, so I had to go out of my way to find them. Again. The first one has the Knuckles Chaotix crew fight a crew led by Mammoth Mogul. Mammoth Mogul. I'm probably gonna be mispronouncing that name for the rest of the series. So this guy's the former ruler of Mobius centuries before most modern races. So why isn't he ruling the world right now? He had been granted limitless power by Chaos Emerald. Right, so does he think he's not powerful enough to overthrow Eggman with the Chaos Emerald? Destroy Robotropolis? Somehow we're expected to believe his people could dethrone him even though he had limitless power. This guy is just made of plot holes. He's just so overpowered that he can't logically coexist in the same world as Eggman. That Chaos Emerald, like with Dimitri, had granted him immortality as well as power, because it just felt like it, I guess. I mean, so many other characters have used the Chaos Emerald and they didn't become immortal. No other explanation for why I decided to make him so powerful. I guess I just decided to. Okay, so after eons of waiting, he's at least saying he wants to overthrow Robotnik and take over the world himself, like I assumed, but the eons of waiting bullshit just makes it all fall apart. Why would he ever wait? He could do this at any time. And why would taking one measly Chaos Emerald increase his power 1,000-fold? Like 2 times I can understand, but 1,000? Not to mention Dimitri had said earlier that even one Chaos Emerald has infinite power, explaining why the floating island was still floating just as well with only one emerald. So they're contradicting a previously established rule here. Just one emerald should give him infinite power. What difference would another emerald make? Infinite plus infinite is still infinite. And why would anyone want to work for this guy? And I actually had to look up what the hell happened to convince this villain and his crew to leave because it seems really inexplicable. The Chaotix launch a collective beatdown on Mogul. Realizing he had planned his attack wrong, Mogul uses his staff to summon his ship and escape with a fearsome foursome. Foursome. Okay, so there isn't an explanation for why the Chaotix suddenly won. They just win, in one panel, after being beaten effortlessly earlier. And once again, the Chaotix, they just randomly decide when the Chaotix are too weak to win a fight, and when they're strong enough to beat Metal Sonic, in just the flip of a coin. This whole story makes no sense. The next story is the return of Octobot, because remember, he wasn't destroyed last time. But instead of having an entertaining story about Octobot being a villain, it turns out that Octobot was just fleeing from the eel boss of the underwater crime organization. Why the hell is Octobot afraid of him instead of trying to roboticize him? It's not funny, it's just nonsensical. This whole plot shouldn't have even happened. Fortunately, the big whale guy who saved Tails earlier defeats this mob guy, who should have easily been roboticized a long time ago. I'm not sure why they expected me to care about any of the characters in the story. It doesn't have anything to do with the Freedom Fighters. And none of the characters have a distinct, multi-traded personality, so nothing's attaching me to them to make me care. It's just worthless filler. The first story was by Mike Gallagher again, and while I didn't hate it as much as the previous story, it was still really frustrating, if only because of the ending, leading into a much worse story. How dare the Freedom Fighters treat Sonic that way after everything he's done for them? They seriously don't know that they're doomed without him. Nobody's realizing this. Even if he wasn't innocent, this would still be bullshit. True friends would just be relieved that he was back to normal and not be in any sort of mood to punish him like that. They would just give him a hug and tell him that they're glad he's safe. I could understand a minor punishment, like no chili dogs for a month. That would make him really upset without betraying him by sending him to prison where he can't help them at all. But good friends don't try to get their necessary friend thrown in jail for trying to help them. That goes without saying, really. And this isn't even pointed out. This is never even pointed out that they're being terrible friends. The only one who would make sense that he conspire against them is Antoine. And even then, Sonic hasn't bullied him for dozens of issues by this point. On screen at least. We don't know what goes behind closed doors. And the second story by Kent Taylor introduces Mammoth Mogul. And again, he's an interesting concept, but he completely falls apart because he's rife with plot holes. And we've already been told that only one emerald alone has infinite power, meaning that getting more of them is pointless. So why would getting the island's emerald give him the extra power he needs to take over the world? And why the hell did he wait eons for this? He's an overpowered villain who would have worked fine if he existed in a separate dimension where there was no Eggman and the emeralds worked differently to justify all this. But instead, he's lived in this dimension all this time, and yet hasn't done anything threatening since he was somehow disposed from power. And there's also the question of why the fuck anyone would want to work for him. Because these guys aren't brainwashed, as far as we know. These guys aren't roboticized, so him even having a crew working for him in the first place is just bullshit. And the Chaotix defeating them so effortlessly after losing badly to them was also bullshit. This whole story is just bullshit. Not too impressed with Kent Taylor so far. If my memory serves me correctly, wasn't he the one who wrote the Sonic loses his super speed from an explosion story? And the third story by Mike Gallagher again was just filler. And not only that, but its entire premise made no sense because the main villain should have been roboticized by Octobot effortlessly. Octobot should have just grabbed him with all of his 8 tentacles. Nothing's making him more powerful than the other fish. It's not like he has a Chaos Emerald or anything. And we had no reason to care about any of the characters or what was going on. So it was filler. It could have not existed and nothing would have been lost. Much like this entire main story arc. I am not looking forward to issue 40 because it's possibly the most infuriating issue in the comics so far.